another pretty good episode that, unfortunately, I just don't have a lot to talk about, other than two topics which I'm going to save for last, so we'll get to those later. Right now, I just want to talk about poor Garibaldi. You have to feel for someone whose biggest strength has always been his detective cognitive abilities, his ability to figure out things, his ability to really dig under the surface and do more than just a surface scan of a situation. And he didn't know that someone who he was basically considering his protege, someone he actually called his brother, was working for, the enemy, their great evil conspiracy, and betrayed him and shot him in the back. It's a little cliched, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense. Maybe I'm just saying that because I'm sympathetic, because that happened to me in real life. Not his exact situation. I got run over by a car. Before that, I was very physically active. The word I like to use is fearless. Nothing scared me. I was just doing whatever, making my life work. I didn't even actually have a car at the time, because I biked everywhere. And then I got hit and run over by a car, and it just completely destroyed my self-confidence. It took me years upon years to try and regain it back, and to be a little bit blunt, I'm still not there. It is a little bit pat that he feels like he is, more on top of things after a single episode, but he also has something I didn't. He has something very, very valuable. He gets to show through action that he is still just as good as he thought he was. There is no better way to restore confidence than to succeed at something you are wavering on. If you're like, I'm not sure if I'm a good artist anymore, and you write and you draw something, and people are like, oh my god, this is amazing, that's a huge boon to your confidence. It's a huge boon to your self-esteem. Same with music, same with writing. Doesn't matter the category. And he had that huge boon, and that he was able to deduce by actually thinking about the situation and going more than surface deep, like his boneheaded security guards were, in order to figure out what exactly was going on with the situation. He was right. He was dead on, just like he always is. And really, that is why Garibaldi is the best man for the job. Now, we know this with the benefit of hindsight. Excuse me. But I do find myself wondering how badly B5 would have gone if he had ended up leaving. Keeping in mind, B5 has already been a nexus point for quite a few galactic events, and will obviously, since it's the main station of the setting, be the nexus point for galactic events in the future. The Deep Space Nine effect. So, yeah, I wonder how badly things would have gone if he had left. I want to talk something. I mentioned how I was going to be more openly negative rather than just gushing about amazing episodes. One thing I want to talk about is the teaser thing. Now, I've talked about teasers extensively over in my Voyager videos. I'm not going to repeat all that talk here, but generally what goes into the creation of a teaser, it's basically a different mindset when you make a good teaser. And usually a quick, short, punchy teaser that gets your attention quickly and effectively is usually the best. Not always. Long teasers can work, and if it really draws itself out properly, can really set the stage for a work, and I've pointed out indications where it's true. I bring it up here because I haven't really talked about teasers in B5 yet, and in this episode I noticed it was like 5.5 freaking minutes of teaser. It's an insanely huge time. That's not something you really do normally if you have teasers in general, which is what I want to talk about. I've always felt that the concept of the teaser in B5 is more like something they're willing to deal with because it's forced by the networks, because at this point in history, in real life television, teasers were the norm. The whole point of a teaser, and the title kind of gets it across, is for people who are, who just finished watching whatever was on previous, who are not fans of the show, and then this teaser is supposed to get their attention, and then, okay, I'll stick around. That's usually why networks push teaser. Why some people creatively like teasers is it's a good way to really get the audience hooked into the individual episode, even though they're already probably going to watch it, because they're trying to tell a good episode, because they want the audience to be engaged for the episode, right? So those are the two perspectives for people who are not fans and for people who are fans. But B5, every teaser, and this one really got across, I always feel like they're just kind of artificially chop off the intro at one point, as if they weren't designing a teaser. Most Star Trek teasers, good or bad, and I shouldn't just limit this to Star Trek, most television teasers, good and bad, are deliberately designed to be a teaser. In B5, I get the exact opposite feeling. They're just like, oh, we need a teaser, so we'll just write the episode, and then at a point at which it makes sense from an editing perspective, we'll chop it off, do the intro, and then do our first commercial break, and then we'll go ahead and continue with the episode. This episode really, really exemplifies that, though, more than any other. It really is just, here's 5.5 minutes of establishing the plot lines of the episode. Oh yeah, then we'll take a break, because we can. Okay, now let's get back to it. The idea being that this is the kind of thing that I would applaud from an idealistic perspective. In other words, you shouldn't have to sell yourself to the audience. You should just focus on making a good work. And yet the realist in me points out that selling yourself to the audience is something that is, at the very within moderation, can be a good thing, trying to keep the audience engaged. Honestly, I think they would have just been better served to remove the teaser format entirely, but of course they didn't have choice on that one. That was network ordered. In this teaser, however, we establish a character called Jan. And Jan is a terrible character. I hate him. He gets in my way all the time. Lord Reffa is who we establish at the intro here. Now, this is not a spoiler, but we will be seeing a lot of Lord Reffa in the future, and I'm sure you could guess that just by the way he's presented here. And yet, even with this very short insight, we already know Lord Reffa as a character. Great job of presenting him. Every time he says something, he's speaking with a form of practiced rhetoric. Whereas, when we see Londo telling similar lies in this episode, he does it with a more form of tired patterning, as if he's going through the motions. When Londo finally actually tells the truth later, his entire presentation, tone, body language, completely different. What I mean by this is that Lord Reffa is young, and ambitious, and reckless, and inexperienced, and foolish, and we get all of that from his presentation here. He is some young punk who doesn't really understand how things work, and most importantly of all, the one big thing that comes with age, he does not understand consequence. He does not understand the consequence of action. So for him, a bloody revolution that would improve his power? Awesome. I'm completely on board with it. And you can tell that Lord Reffa wants to rise Lord Reffa to glory. By contrast, Malari, Londo, goes along with it because Londo is experienced, older, venerated. He knows what he's doing. He is basically the exact opposite of Reffa in many ways. And you can tell by his presentation, he's not doing this for Londo. He already has a fairly large amount of political clout right now. And probably much more so after his deal with Mr. Morden. So, Londo's doing it to make a proud, glorious Centauri Republic. You can also see his reaction to several things Reffa says, including the fact that he doesn't really seem to agree with the negative comments about the current emperor. And again, a lot of what Reffa says strikes me as rhetoric. In other words, things that you use to try and sway people to your side without actually meaning it. And that's what I'm trying to define here. Because Reffa, his motivations pretty clearly seem to be just about him. He wants his own little private chunk of the pie to get bigger. And I love the fact that Londo still goes along with it, even knowing this is probably a foolish plan, because he feels that this might be an opportunity to actually renovate the Centauri Republic. This is most especially driven home in his last few encounters with the techno mages, which I'll talk about later, where he pretty much flat out says, he says without saying that his whole reason for wanting this was not for his own sake. I mean, he'll enjoy the ride, but his ambition is for his people, and that's been true all the way throughout Season 1 as well, so this is nothing new. So I have two notes here, the Drazi and the techno mages. We're actually going to save those for last. Those are the two big topics I want to talk about. Believe it or not, I don't actually have that much else to talk about. We see a little bit more of Sheridan's charismatic style in his approach. For example, he's just casual like, oh, when you're talking about a promotion. And she's like, I'm sorry, did you see a promotion? Yeah, I did. Would you like some juice? Just he even says it smoother than I do, because I stuttered over the words. You know, yeah, would you like some juice? You know, just completely casual about it. I love the way he just kind of rolls over her with that, especially given her first assignment is dealing with the Drazi situation. It's really nice. I love Veer's speech about currents in Destiny. Some of the currents you have to follow, some currents you don't, and you have no idea which is which. I like that because it shows probably our first real peek into Veer as a character. He will be a recurring character throughout the series, and I like the fact that he slowly grows from basically an ancillary character to a secondary, and arguably to a primary over the course of the series. I like the fact that he does have that kind of a mind underneath it. We see someone who is, I hate to use such a word here, but it seems apt, wise. Probably far wiser than Londo, despite the fact that Londo has way more experience under his belt. And yet, for all his wisdom, he still has idealism. And I like that too. It in many ways makes him a similar counterpart to Londo and then to Reffa. Reffa is that same youth and lack of experience, but he has a great deal of self-interest involved. Veer, by contrast, has enough of an understanding about the way things work to know that that's not the way things should go without actually knowing how things do go. None of the experience. And Londo is, of course, in the middle, being the old, bitter man. Now, I also really, really like how Veer has some serious balls in this episode, where he actually walks straight up to the big, the holodeck thing, and is like, "No, I need to make this thing, please. Please. I can't go back empty-handed. Oh my god, the yawns are attacking again." I guess my next point is about Garibaldi again, but honestly, it's just repeating a point I've already made. I like the fact that they get to show off his detective abilities. The fact that he realized, wait a minute, she didn't talk through an uplink like she normally does? That's unusual for her. Why don't I go ahead and verify this? And, it's wonderful because he's not actually subtle. He's just smart. He walks in like, "Hey, so if anybody needs help, now would be a good time to say so." Londo has a very horrifying line at the end. Yeah, I'm kind of skipping the two big meats of the episode, obviously, because I want to talk about them last. He has this horrifying line where he's talking to the techno mage, Elric, and he says, "Am I going to be spending the rest of my life paying for one little mistake?" I don't think this is spoilers at all. Remember, he knew what he was getting into when he approached Mr. Morton, when he accepted Mr. Morton's deal. I think he'll be paying for that for a long time. And then there's that horrible pseudo-prophecy that the technomage gives him. "I see the hand reaching out, billions of people crying your name, your victims." That's chilling. And we've already seen a lot of blood, technically, sits on Londo's hands, a lot of Narn blood. How much worse is that going to get? Let's talk about the two other things that I want to talk about. First, let's talk about technomages. Now, the technomages is a fascinating concept to me. They're the ones who try to figure out the patterns of the universe. He mentions a few things in the knowledge they've gathered, like, for example, the 14 words you could tell anyone to make them fall in love with you. This is actually a real-life philosophy. The idea that there is such a thing as a perfect pattern to everything, to the way every one of the absolutely infinite number of variables interacts with each other. If you could just imagine, close your eyes for a moment, and imagine all of reality is just an infinite stream of variables and calculations and equations that are constantly bouncing off of each other and changing and mutating each other as they go. This philosophy insists there is a pattern through all that. And if you understand the pattern, then you can manipulate it, you can control it. Ergo, the idea of being able to tell someone ... and they would receive it. To be able to console someone, to be able to get over something, to be able to understand something. Because you have such control over the pattern of reality, for lack of a better term, of existence, that you have that capacity to do that. And it's a fascinating idea. I myself admit I am a huge fan of patterns in general. I've been watching patterns in human society for most of my entire life. And when I was a kid, I was very fascinated by history for the same basic reason. So I find the concept interesting. I'm not sure I would believe it would apply universally, but it's still very, very interesting. I also love the implication that what the technomages do isn't a big deal. The technomages are such a logical conclusion. In fact, I'm a little surprised they're not used a little bit more in other settings as well. The technomages are quite literally people who have very advanced technology who use their knowledge of the patterns of life in order to affect technology. They simply have very advanced technology. So advanced that most people refer to what they do as spells and curses and demons and otherwise refer to them as if they were magical, despite the fact that by their own admission, none of it is. And that at the same time they admit that at a certain level the variance between magic and tech just kind of blurs based on your own understanding. Here in real life, we can print a new heart for a person, which they can then implant and use. That is a fairly recent development, but that is how far our technology has gone in real life. We can print a heart and have it work, and they're still pushing that technology. Still, that's one of the reasons I've been a big supporter of 3D printing in general. Not because of all the stupid things you can do with it, like making stupid plastic guns or whatever. No, I'm talking about the fact that that is a huge boon to the medical industry. Think about what that could mean. Think about how huge the waiting list is in some areas for replacement organs, for people who are suffering catastrophic internal failure, for people who need blood. Think about what possibilities exist at that. That's where we're at tech level now. That's a thing. That's not science fiction. That's not fantasy. That's a thing. Rewind time a century, just 100 years. And what would they think of that? No. Rewind time 50 years. What would people think of that technology? We have the technology to condense information from the air and interact live with people across the world without being connected to a cable. We have the ability now to project images onto real-life things through camera and interact with those images in pre-described ways. You know, our technology is already astonishingly advanced when you really actually sit back and think about it. And so at what point do you distinguish it between magic and tech? Now, it is worth noting as an anecdote that I've always been one of those people who's viewed magic as something that is logical. In fantasy, I mean. In other words, the idea that in a particular setting, magic follows its own rules, right? Now, I have actually always disliked the settings who perceive magic as just, it does whatever. And I dislike that because it feels very lazy and it takes me out of it. It makes me uninvested. It's like, oh, well, I can just do whatever with magic, so nothing matters at that point. Magic. No, I don't like that. I like magic being able to accomplish things that are defined. I like magic being able to accomplish things that are predestinated, if you will. You know, the fact that I can accomplish this and this and this, and therefore if I combine these to here, I can do this, and it's logical. It makes sense. So to me, the merger of the two is very logical, and this is one of the reasons why I have, you know, the Imperium is a setting in which it is not sci-fi or fantasy, it is just a setting. I don't see any distinction between the two. So it is logical to me that a group who understands that pattern, as previously described, and has very advanced technology, basically is blurring the line. They're at the point where it's like, yeah, we're just doing stuff. And I like that. It's a fascinating idea. One thing I find myself really thinking about, though, and I know you're going to make fun of me for this, is the Q over in Star Trek. Now, people have theorized about the Q many, many times. Most of those theories tended to go in one direction, though. The idea of them being energy beings, right up until Voyager kind of wrecked them with the Civil War arc. The Q and the Gray. At that point, it pretty much immediately shifted from energy beings to, oh no, they're just very advanced aliens. In other words, the Q are techno mages. Now, I don't like that idea, as I've said before. However, I cannot deny it actually has genuine merit. It is very logical to think that the Q, for all their advancedness, are basically just beings who have extremely advanced technology. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, a being that can access a reality-shifting engine, okay? Now, this engine is tied into you, your movements, your thoughts, so you think something, and the reality-shifting engine will readjust the molecules and the atoms on the fly and generate energy and teleport to and from at will, whatever it needs to do. At that point, it's not hard to perceive the Q as being beings who simply are controlling this great engine, or engines, as the case may be, throughout the galaxy, instead of them literally being able to and make something happen. Now, I'm not saying either is more valid than the other. I'm just making the argument for the side I don't agree with. But I've always found the technomage concept very interesting, if for no other reason than the fact that it acknowledges the conceit that both are ill-defined when you get down to it. Technology I've always defined as the application of human innovation. I've said that many, many times. And I've said that because, in my opinion, the definition of technology is one of those amorphous things that is meaningless. It's a meaningless definition. Obviously my glasses are technology, right? If I were to pick, I don't have one right here, but if I were to pick up a stick, that is technology. If I were to talk to a device sitting on another device that is recording to a third device, and then later edit this to upload this to some place where people across the world can see this, that is also technology. Now, obviously, there's some distinctions there, and there is obvious purpose behind more literal definitions, but the definition of just technology, the overall umbrella, has always been something I've found to be vague and frankly unnecessary. This is why I believe in that blend between fantasy and sci-fi, because how do you define magic? You see the general idea here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and chop that off because I want to talk about the Drazi. The Drazi are arguably my favorite culture in Babylon 5. I'm not kidding. I actually have built several of my own cultures in various settings I've written that are very similar in concept to the Drazi. For those of you who aren't watching this episode with me, allow me to elucidate. The Drazi, every 5 years, sit down and all Drazi everywhere pick randomly out of a barrel, purple or green, and then they fight for about a year, 1.2 years in human time. Once they're done, whoever won the fight between the two is now the dominant leader, and the greens or the purples, as need be, now dominate their society for 5 years, or, well, 3.8 years, until it gets to the point where they draw from the things again, right? It's funny to me because Ivanova is constantly pissed at how arbitrary it is. But that's part of why it makes so much perfect sense to me. I'm reminded of a very old Star Trek episode where they have the computer, I forget the name of it, where they have a computer that generates, that fights their wars for them, and generates the results for them, and says, well, this has happened, and therefore these are the results. And people are like, okay, well, I just died in an attack, so I guess I have to walk into the death meter, bye, that kind of a thing. I actually, it's so wonderfully arbitrary. I find that idea fascinating. It's the idea of a culture that no longer wants to care about credos or philosophies, killing you because of money, or food, or territory, or desire, or hate, or greed, or rage, or anything, or just being mentally ill. All the thousands and thousands of reasons that I could want to hurt you, or you could want to hurt me. We'll just throw it all the window and say, well, you're purple and I'm green, so pooah! It is also a solution to a problem. The problem being the governance of individuals. They have decided that the best way, because this is all about, this is their election. Think about that for a moment. This is how they elect their leaders for 3.8 years. Or maybe it's 5 years afterward. They never really clarify that. This is how they elect their leadership. Rather than having this crap show every 4 years, I'm using the United States perspective here, of people running around spending way too much money to convince other people to try and lean in their direction and to get, and you know what, I don't actually want to get into it. Let's just say it's all a mess. I actually know a fairly large amount about the United States presidential election process and how much of a meaningless drivel garbage it is. The thing that amuses me, though, is it's just about as arbitrary as picking something out of a barrel, but it's a lot less expensive. Takes a lot less time. Well, that's not true, because they still fight for a year. So never mind, I'll take back the time thing. But it is a lot less expensive, and it's a lot less pretentious. Rather than someone getting up on stage and lying about what they think to you to try and convince you, well, they're purple, and I happen to be green. So I don't like that guy, because he's purple. Now, if that doesn't sound eerily familiar, you probably don't live in the States and don't know someone who will always support one party or the other because it's the party, or be against one party or the other because it's the party, because they're wearing purple and you're wearing green. There's a simple honesty in the Drazi's method that I actually find admirable. It is a solution to the problem of governance. Whoever wins this is in charge. Now, that would be a messed up society to live in, I'll freely admit that. It also is an extremely flawed society when interacting with external powers, and we see this because of how Ivanova actually kind of solves the problem. I gotta be honest, I saw that solution from the beginning, but nevertheless, it probably never occurred to her for the same reason it shouldn't have ever occurred to her. In other words, that shouldn't have worked. Her taking that away shouldn't have accomplished anything. However, the moment she put a purple banner onto one of the other persons, that should have been a sign that that solution would work. That the moment it changed hands, that changed their perspective. And again, I hate to bring the real world thing into this, but it's not really any different from one politician one day saying, I am no longer a part of the Democratic Party. I am now part of the Republican Party, or vice versa. Think about it. Anyways, that's all I got. Bit of a short thing. Very, very good episode. All of these are good. I've been absolutely adoring these. I may take a bit of a break. I'm basically passing out here as I speak. I was really hoping to record one more episode, but we'll see. Anyways, I will hopefully be seeing you guys next time.